Hey everyone, it is 7:19 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on June the 8th. I guess it's supposed to be 2022 years from the birth of Christ. Yeah, maybe so. Probably not though. Probably not. So what I've got today is actually a really extemporaneous, or maybe more spontaneous, little thing here for the briefs, because I find it really interesting. I think there's a lot to this that has bearings on how old this land, North America, where I live, is. I started paying attention to this. I don't know what it was exactly that made me first take notice of Lowhead dams, unfortunately. Maybe it was because I had seen one in a local river. That could be why. I don't remember. But they fascinated me. Why are they there? What purpose could they possibly serve? Why doesn't any official agency seem to know how many there are? And why is it the reasons for them always seem to be different and never seem to add up? They don't make sense. And I'm sorry, you might hear me talking kind of strange because I have these whitening strips on my teeth right now. I'm having to multitask. I just got these whitening strips I'm using because I drink coffee. I drink a lot of black coffee, and I smoke cigarettes. And I don't want to hear it. Funny thing about cigarettes and tobacco, when you look into tobacco. So the guy who started the American Cancer, well, he didn't start it. He was like the first president of the American Cancer Society or Association. It was an official government agency. His name was Alton Ochsner, not Jewish. Alton Ochsner was a doctor. So he was in medical school, and when he was in medical school in the 1930s. When he was in medical school, he was awoke in the middle of the night so that he would have the opportunity to go to the university's facility where they did after you're dead, where they cut you open. I can't remember that word, crying out loud. Autopsy on a man who had died of lung cancer. The reason he was woke in the middle of the night to go and observe that autopsy of the man who died with lung cancer is because in the 1930s, lung cancer was so rare. They didn't know if he would have another opportunity. His class would have another opportunity to witness the autopsy of a man who died of lung cancer, with lung cancer, because lung cancer and death thereby was not frequently even heard of at that time, the 1930s. Funny thing is, if you go back and you look at some demographics and statistics back in the 1930s, more people per capita smoked back then cigarettes, pipes, cigars, than they do today. Something's not adding up. And when you consider the fact that Alton Ochsner was the man being president of the American Cancer Society who popularized the notion that lung cancer is a direct result from smoking cigarettes. That was him that popularized that, very, very much so. And at the same time, Alton Ochsner also was heavily involved with the popularizing and distribution of the early, like the first rollout of polio vaccines. Polio vaccines, which have since been linked, I'm going to say linked, but it's so hard to find anything official because, of course, no one's ever going to admit that it has positive links to, okay? But there are so many studies that would suggest the polio vaccine has so much to do with so many soft tissue cancers. Same guy, Alton Ochsner, popularized the notion, lung cancer and cigarettes, and was heavily invested in the polio vaccine. I would say that alone should cause everyone to question whether or not smoking tobacco, let's back up a second, tobacco in its pure form. Now, when I say that, I mean tobacco that was not, for one thing, full of all of the fillers that they allow in cigarettes and other tobaccos, and for all kinds of pretexts that they allow these fillers in there. Things that don't belong with the tobacco. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a cotton filter, passing it through a cotton filter, if that's what you want to do. It does lessen how strong it is when you do that. But I'm talking about everything unnatural along the way, whether it's glues that they use in the paper, whether it's things they're allowed to put in there, whether they're wood chips, chemicals, glues. Pure tobacco. That, for one thing, doesn't have any additives or fillers to the tobacco itself, chemicals. And secondly, that hasn't been raised in soil that is full of, just saturated with petrochemical agents, pesticides, herbicides, because they don't let, for one thing, they don't let the land rest every 7th year. They're greedy. And I think there's a lot more to it than just greed. Pure tobacco. I doubt that the smoking, regular smoking of pure tobacco has led that many people to die of lung cancer. You see, we'd have to go back a long ways, because it was after Alton Ochsner and his declaration in pushing, via the American Cancer Society, that cigarettes were the cause of lung cancer, and probably others, because now what they've done is they've been able to use cigarettes to say, oh, it's causing all these kind of cancers. But the same guy was so instrumental in rolling out and popularizing the polio vaccine, and of course vaccines that followed that, that they won't allow to officially be linked with soft tissue cancers. But there's so many signs that they are, and it's, of course, it's not something that tends to happen right away. And this is a normal thing that tends to happen with the administration of various vaccines, is latency. I believe that's what it's called. It's latency. So you're not going to see these bad effects until years down the road. So I had to put that in there, because over the years, so many people that I have to hear it from about smoking cigarettes. And yeah, is it an addiction? Well, yeah, I mean, nicotine is addictive. That's true. Of course, most of the people I have to hear it from, they won't admit that they struggle with addictions, oftentimes far worse. Eating addictions, money addictions, shopping addictions, alcohol addictions, security addictions. But, you know, if they can link it to a chemical that I have trouble functioning without, then somehow their addictions aren't as bad. And I mean, I just want to throw up when some fat body tries to preach to somebody who has a problem with nicotine or some other drug like that, which isn't making somebody go out and rob and steal and hurt people, you know. It's just disgusting. It's hypocritical. So anyways, all right, that over. So that's why the strips. That's why I sound a little bit weird. I have to multitask right now. I'm looking at these rivers in the United States. So I started out by looking at the rivers in Michigan, which I still do, because there's a lot of rivers in Michigan that lead to Lake Michigan. That's their mouth draining into Lake Michigan, various sources. A lot of springs up here. A lot of springs everywhere in the United States, by the way. Fresh water coming out of the ground, springing up, and helping to form a river. Sometimes multiple springs will help to form that river. Sometimes you'll have these large areas of land called drainage plain, where I think the only logical answer is that you have many underground springs that aren't apparent, like have sources on the surface where you can see them, but they are all releasing their water into the ground, so below surface, and they're saturating these large, sometimes very, very large areas of ground. It saturates so much, and the ground is high enough to where all of that water begins to drain off. It becomes a creek, stream, a river, dumps into other rivers. There are big rivers in the United States. There are big rivers in Michigan. So what has gotten me so interested in taking a close look at the rivers in the United States, the rivers in Michigan, the rivers in Indiana, Illinois, the eastern half from the Mississippi over, the eastern half of the United States, or more appropriately, North America, is, for one thing, these low-head dams, which don't seem to have any good purpose other than stopping and turning over boats, which they do very well, and killing people, which they also do very well. They're very good at those things. They aren't so good at much else. And then starting to notice how many there are. Like, my goodness, are there a lot? And I post, whenever I find, these odd things, I'll post pictures of them or a bit of information on them, whether it be, like, for instance, recently in the Obery Project Panoply Facebook group, I posted a Google Earth picture of 5 consecutive low-head dams on the Grand River that runs right through Grand Rapids, Michigan, and how those 5 consecutive low-head dams completely blows the narrative out of the water. Any narrative you'll find for the reason of low-head dam existence, it's pretty much destroyed by those 5 consecutive low-head dams within a stretch of only about a half mile. Now, what I found from looking at even local rivers, like, for instance, the Grand River, which I posted that picture of the 5 consecutive low-head dams on the Facebook group, the Obery Project Panoply. If you're on Facebook and you're not in that group, you need to request to join the group. It's very easy. You literally just have to agree to the rules, which are not that tough. Basically, rules like don't come here and be a snowflake really is the encapsulation of, I think, the 3 rules. Okay. So yeah, if you're not, join that. If you're not on Facebook, I completely understand why. But consider joining it and at least joining that group. And if you have valuable content in many different areas, there's a lot of things I consider valuable content. Submit posts. So I start tracking, and this is important, and you can use Google Earth to do this. I start tracking these rivers, like the Grand River, from its mouth at Lake Michigan, slowly and close up. Because since they're using these aerial photos, not satellite photos, they're using aerial photos. They're sending drones up, essentially, and they are going in certain patterns, and they're taking pretty good high-res photos, and they're stitching them together. So they're pretty good high-res photos. I don't believe they always accurately represent. I mean, we're looking at Google Earth. We're looking at a globe. And even if you want to believe that the Earth is a sphere, I would say that there are simply indications all over that sphere that it's not accurate even as a sphere. In a number of ways. However, the nice thing is, frequently, there's so much that they would have to try to edit out, which anybody could just go and verify. You know, if they tried to edit out all the low-head dams, you could go there and verify it and say, why are they editing these things out? And that would actually look more suspicious than just leaving a lot of these things in. And it's not just those. There's a lot of structures. There are the presumed hydroelectric dams. Presumed in the sense, not that they're being used for hydroelectric, though I don't know. I haven't been in them. However, they do have all the accoutrements around them that would make them seem that is what they're doing, is creating electricity through the falling of water and the turning of turbines. However, what you tend to have in all of these is a similarity of very old buildings, oftentimes with very long, large windows that in many cases have been bricked up, blocked off. You can tell alterations have been made to these buildings, and it doesn't make complete sense why they weren't built that way in the first place, and they had to do alterations to them. And then you have the backside of the building, so if they're impounding water, which that's what you do with a hydro dam, you impound water. On the impound side, you can tell that there is newer concrete work that has been done on these structures. So there's always these signs that something happened there that we're not being told about. And one thing I found in the Grand River is that there are a number of not only low-head dams that seem to occur before you get to certain cities, which is interesting. But there are also very odd structures. Because I said in one of the posts that I put up on in the Obery Project Panoply in Facebook that I think the way it would have to work is, because it's a river and rivers flow and the water doesn't stop flowing, is that either there would have had to have been a lock in place on the river, which we would then have to find signs on the low-head dams themselves. Most low-head dams are an ogee shape, so in a sense like a reverse V or U, but they tend to be on average of 8, 10, 12 or more feet wide at the top. They're tapered down for strength at the bottom on both the front and the back faces, typically. Definitely on the front face, because the reason is when you give it that angle, and the angle that they usually sit at is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of around 70 degrees. You give it that kind of angle, the hydraulic drop at that angle is perfect for creating what they call the boil. in this area. And the boil is the thing that draws the vessels up to the drop itself, which tends to fill the vessel quickly with water and make it capsize. It's also what keeps the people that get caught in it so that they perish, usually from exhaustion, because they're being pulled back to the hydraulic drop or the low head dam itself, and the pressure is causing them to go underwater. It brings them out a number of feet away from the low head dam, but the current, the circulating current, pulls them back to the dam, and they go through the same thing. They just keep going through it, and they can't get out of it. Because one thing you'll notice is all of these structures, they have walls built on either side that don't facilitate somebody getting out. You would think if they had built these for the reasons they say, that there would be ways that would have been just built in on either side for somebody to exit. You know, ladders, something so that somebody could just swim, because it's not that hard to actually swim laterally, like along the low head dam, and get to one edge or the other. You could eventually do it without too much effort and then get yourself out. But they don't have that. There's no signs that anybody ever thought that was a good idea. There's every sign that looks like somebody was trying to keep people in there and not allow them out. So the more I look at things, I've been looking at, because I want to compare, I have this idea that you would have to have either some sort of lock. The lock could only be on part of the river, because you have to allow that continual flow somehow or another. But I think with low head dams that's not very feasible. And I think what you would actually need is a side channel with a lock. And so I started looking around at other rivers for that. And one thing I came across that I just thought was pretty interesting is that the Mississippi the Mississippi is probably easily the most important river in America, because so many rivers, like rivers and creeks in America, lead to the Mississippi. I mean, it is amazing and if you can get to the Mississippi, you can get to the Great Lakes. You can get out to the ocean at the northern Atlantic. You can get out to the Gulf of Mexico. If you can get to the Mississippi. So if you're in the Great Lakes, you can get to the Mississippi. You can get barges because of the size of barges and the size of both canals and or rivers that lead from Chicago down to the Mississippi. There is such a very exhaustive system of river navigation available because of the Mississippi and because of the Great Lakes that it's really important. I mean, nobody has to say that, I think, for everybody to understand how important it is, but it is. And it's shocking when you start looking into how many rivers and creeks, which a lot of creeks are navigable. You could put, for instance, if you did not want to go through the expense of shipping your grain, if, say, you lived near where I grew up, and there's a lot of grain that's grown there, and there's a lot of pork and other animal products that are raised there, and you did not want to go through the expense of shipping those things on land, there are creeks that you can use. And here's the other thing. This is really interesting. So a lot of the boats that they used to use in a lot of these old canals, and they still exist, a number of these boats still exist. The way they would design them is they would be kind of long, but quite narrow. And their draft would be extremely shallow. I find it interesting, all of the channels, just in the little farm town I grew up in, Couts, Indiana, all of the channels that are sort of just brushed off as drainage. Or maybe not so much drainage, but irrigation. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there's a big difference between an irrigation ditch. An irrigation ditch typically will have such a small amount of water that it's very easy to, jump over it. I would do it all the time because we had irrigation ditches all over in the fields behind where we lived. There's a big difference between an irrigation ditch and a large channel. That isn't a creek, but it's literally a channel, and there are these channels all over Kouts that span very, very long distances. And they lead, many of them, these large channels, lead to the creek that ran next to my house, which was a decent-sized creek, and if you had a boat with that was narrow, with a shallow draft, you could transport a good amount of product through these, not irrigation ditches, but I would say just canals, that they are canals. No matter where you were, you could get your product to these canals. These canals would oftentimes lead to, it's called Crooked Creek to this day. And Crooked Creek actually spans many, many, many miles, starting, I think, past Westville, which is the northeastern part of Porter County, all the way down through Kouts. And on the sort of southwestern side, it goes into the Kankakee River. The Kankakee River in Illinois, the Kankakee and the Des Plaines River meet up with the Illinois River. The confluence, they basically form the Illinois River, but with those two meeting, the Illinois River goes down to the Mississippi River. What caught my attention, I thought this was so interesting, is there was this video on YouTube about a specific lock and dam that it's located on the Mississippi River near Alton, Illinois. It's the Melvin Price Lock and Dam. And you can see, so over here is the dam side, which is, now you're going to have to forgive me for the sake of my ignorance, okay? I'm sorry, but you're going to have to forgive me for being ignorant, because when I look at, for instance, this dam, it's got 7 sluices along here, and then we have these locks. You have this lock, you have this lock over here, so we've got 2 locks, and we've got this other channel with another 2 sluices in between them. I don't from here see anything that would tell me that there's any kind of power being generated. So I don't think any power in any of these lock and dam systems is being generated. It's simply a dam with a lock. And if you have this dam with a lock, with these locks like this, what that tells me is that somebody is controlling river traffic. And that's the whole point of them, is to control river traffic. Now, in these locks and dams, you have to pay fees, of course. So they're like toll booths on a road. They're like toll booths on a road. Of course, with a road, somebody has to go through all kinds of trouble, and all kinds of material expense has to be invested in creating these roads. Not so with rivers. Okay? Yahweh created the rivers. That's just somebody controlling them. What I found was amazing is the Army Corps of Engineers claims that they constructed 29 lock and dam systems on the Mississippi, starting in Alton, Illinois, and going, continuing northward on the Mississippi from Alton. I'm pulling out here at Alton, and you figure, excuse me, from Alton, Illinois, right here, and all the way up to somewhere in the neighborhood of like Wisconsin and Minnesota, all of these locks and dams are placed on the Mississippi, and they say that they did this starting around the 1930s, which I think is horseshit. Because one reason, this Melvin Price lock and dam, it's a well-known fact that they demolished the old one that was there and built this new one. So obviously the Army Corps of Engineers sucks at what they do. If they put in a lock and dam in the 1930s, almost 30 of them along the Mississippi. The Mississippi is no small river. So how wide is it here at the Melvin Price lock and dam, for instance? Why is my measuring tool not working? Let's try it again. Just the lock and dams themselves, forget the extra water they're impounding. That's 2,000 feet wide. Mississippi's big, wide river. The depth of the Mississippi can vary. Oftentimes, a typical depth for the Mississippi might be 30, 40 feet, but it varies. I mean, there are a lot of places where it's far more shallow, where you'll see sandbars and all of that. But that's a hell of a lot for the Army Corps of Engineers to do in the 1930s, and that's on top of all of the other projects that they claimed to have done. Now, the Mississippi is not the biggest point here. I'm going to actually zoom in. Two things that are interesting. One thing that's interesting is this lock and dam system, which is obviously controlling the traffic. And remember, if we're talking about security, you want to focus more on controlling the traffic going upstream, not downstream, okay? For the most part. And I would imagine that could vary depending on who might have gotten control of the land in the areas upstream. So I understand that. But for the most part, you want your control to be focused on what's coming up against current, upriver. Now, it's interesting that this first one and the whole series after that start in Alton, Illinois, because Alton, Illinois is only, I'll do this in miles, and I'll do it in river miles. It'll be kind of, let me pick path here, sorry. Oops. Delete those real quick. Clear. Okay. So in river miles, the first lock and dam system is only about 5 miles up from the confluence of the Missouri River into the Mississippi. And I tracked the Mississippi from the confluence of the Missouri southward. There's no lock and dam systems all the way south till you get to the Ohio confluence, and the Ohio is another very, very, very big river. But there is a lock and dam system only a few miles up the Ohio. Now, what I found was interesting, and it makes me think that one nation, for much of the history of these rivers and people existing here, is that probably one nation was controlling this whole side here of Illinois that we would call Missouri. And the reason is, one of the reasons I think that, is because I tracked the Missouri River up for much of the state of Missouri. Now, and I wasn't finding signs of locks and dams or lowhead. Well, maybe on the lowhead part. We'll see. But what I was finding was this, and this is where anybody is very free to tell me how ignorant I am, and this is what this really is, and oh my gosh, I can't believe you didn't know that. If you need to, if it makes you feel better, certainly. And yeah, please correct me if I'm wrong about any of these things. Let me go back to my line tool. So now there are a number of spots along here. That's 250 feet. That little line I just made right there, because the Missouri River, and we are still just in North St. Louis. it's so many feet, they're not going to tell me, well, it's miles. So let me see, it's in feet. That's 1,216 feet right there. So this small channel off the side, 260 feet, that's a big channel. That's a big channel. And oftentimes it's odd how these channels are shaped. It's odd where they are at. One of the things I noticed is so strange, because look, a lot of rivers do wind, and a lot of rivers what they'll call braiding. And you'll see that up the Mississippi as you get further north in the Mississippi. You'll see braiding. You'll see some braiding south. Okay, if you look at this area right here, this is what they might call braiding right here. It's where certain channels might go off. They might intertwine with one another, but that's not what I'm talking about. We'll see this on the Des Plaines River and the Illinois River too. We'll see these channels that not just, sometimes it's their shape because they're so perfect, they have to be a canal of some sort, a channel of some sort. The Mississippi has that, by the way, just south of that Alton lock and dam. Big long channel that runs right next to the river. Okay, so it's interesting. What I think is even more interesting is when you get into these, what seem to be little channels here. And this is interesting. What is that right there? What is that right there? You can see there's a large accumulation of trees and other debris. And it looks like we have a lot of falling water. And what is this structure right in the middle of the river in this channel? How about over here in this other channel? Why do we have what seems to be a structure running across that channel right there? That's interesting, right? Well, the other thing that I find really interesting is as you travel up the Missouri, and this is the same on the Mississippi. This is the same in almost every large river in at least the eastern United States, so close to the Mississippi, leading into the Mississippi. So I am considering, the parts of Missouri and Iowa, okay, because we're talking about rivers that are linked with the Mississippi River. You're going to find these things in virtually all of these rivers. So we've got these channels around here. Who knows if they're natural or not, but you have all along in the river the remnants of what? You have it on the left side of the river. You can see it there, these lines. You have it on the right side of the river. You can see this angled line. And in most of them, there's a gap right here. I don't know why there's a low spot near the angle change. That could be nothing. And then you have this long section that runs parallel with the channel of the river. You go in close, you can see that their rocks are made up of somebody put these rocks in. And you can see, rocks are oftentimes used on oceans to create artificial harbors. But when you look at these, when I look at them, because I haven't had enough time to think about them, I really have to wonder what they were for. Because you have the lines, so you have them running on the right side. These angled lines, one is running parallel with the river, one is running quasi-perpendicular to the river, depending. You have this one that leads all the way up and makes it seem like this channel right here was meant to be there. Now this channel has some sort of structure that's breaking the channel halfway through. And this one, interestingly enough, is set right in front of this other channel, which has, again, a structure that seems to be breaking it right there. And on the left side of the river, you have these straight lines. So they're not angled, and they don't have a parallel line, but they are straight, and they seem to also be made out of some kind of gravel or rock or something. Okay? That's the first one that I simply noticed. And I'm not sure about this channel right here. It's loaded with sandbars. And again, we are still It's Pelican Island Natural Reserve. I'm just gonna pan out just a little bit and show you that we're still in North St. Louis, what they're calling Old Jamestown, okay? And St. Louis is a big city. Now, in this channel, it appears that we again have something blocking the entirety of the channel. Something stone, concretious, something. Looks like it was blocking or partially blocking the flow of water in there. Now, what I showed you back here with those lines all along, we can see them up here. We can see lines that would appear to be part of what was shaping the channel. We can see these perpendicular lines. Anytime you see these lines, I really shouldn't have to zoom in. You can figure they're at least large sort of gravel sand, earth. Is there concrete down there? I'm not sure. There might have been plenty of people who have noticed this, who have told us all about it. I haven't found anything on it yet. More of these lines down here. These are quite large. Whatever these structures are, they're quite large. Now, look. Here you have, and you see how there are these lines that are running parallel to the river on this one. Okay. Over here you have a road. This road is, you know, that is, that's probably a 2-lane road, not a major highway right there, okay? So I'm getting about 13 feet or so. And here, one of these structures sticking out of the water, get the width of one of those is double that. That's about 23 feet across. This is no small, it's no small thing. And we have them all over. They're in the Missouri River, they're in the Mississippi, they're in the Ohio, they're in the Illinois, and they're different. And they vary. Oh, look at this. So we can find these lines again, and wouldn't you know it, we've got what appears to be an old channel running alongside the river. Now again, are these channels organic? Are they natural? Are they not? I don't know. I don't know, and I don't have any theories concerning it. But whenever I see lines because the water is catching something like this, and you see that line right there, right there. Now, depending on how far it extends into the river, I start wondering what might have been there. And this one extends pretty far out into the Missouri River. It extends, that's a long ways, folks. That's 464 feet from the bank out there, okay? And then we have this, which looks pretty darn large to me. That's 20-30 feet wide. And right now it seems like it just ends right there. This little jut, what was that for? And if that's rock, I don't know right now if the Missouri River is mostly in bedrock. The Mississippi is, for large part, it's muddy. It's a very muddy river. But that's interesting. I just noticed that. That's why I was focusing in on that. But if I continue down the Missouri River, and keep in mind, this is 1,500 feet wide at this point. It's a big river. We see more of those lines right down here. All right, keeping close on it. And let it come into focus. Now we do have some channels here. Natural, not natural, I don't know, but more of these lines jutting out there, there, on the opposite bank. And here, maybe the water's high because we have there. These don't really strike me as something natural at all. At all. Do we have any kind of a structure barring this channel? Ooh. Not seeing one. Not seeing one in this channel. what do we got here? Is this anything running across? That's strange, those lines. It's just power. That's just power. Okay. So it doesn't look like there is something that continues across that channel. Not right now anyways. Come out. But just continuing along, you'd be surprised. You think you've really gotten a long ways on a river, checking out everything about the river, and you really haven't gotten anywhere near as far as you thought you had gotten. So here again, what is this gigantic thing? Look, right here. And okay, the water is flowing this way, the way in which that Google Earth cursor is going. The water's flowing that way, okay? So everything you're seeing right here, that's likely a lot of foam that's being created, or a boil, because we can see part of it right here too. Now, we'll pull out from that. So it looks like we've just got a field here, and we got some woods over here. And up from that, it appears that we have some sort of sandbar. It appears to be some sort of a sandbar up from that. And let's see here. We have got, what do we got? It is possible that there were channels. Let's pull back a little bit. So that's what we have. We have a very large channel here. Oops. Didn't mean to measure it. And we've got this large structure in the middle of that channel. And that's 400 feet wide. It's pretty big. And then when we get to the end of this channel, and we get back to the main part of the Missouri River, then we've got this structure now. And we've got this structure. And it looks quite similar to those ones that are partly washed out, or whatever they are. That doesn't look like something that was made naturally, does it? That's pretty big. That's 36 feet wide, right in that little spot that I just measured, right there. 36 feet wide. 36 feet. Right? That's pretty big. It says 28 feet. And we got pools. And now bridges. So the interesting thing is, over and over again, when you track these rivers, you're going to find, especially by what seem to be these side channels, these odd structures down in the water. That one right there is 400 and something feet out from the shore. This one right here, you can tell there's one right there, 512 feet out from the shore. There's another one. How far from the shore is that one? 316 feet. This one, again, 400 feet. And they keep, they seem to occur at very specific kinds of locations where there are these little side channels that often have some kind of block to them. So the idea is, why do they exist? Why are they blocked up with a lowhead? Because a lowhead, again, a lowhead doesn't seem to be designed in any way, shape, or form for passage to take place, unless you had a lowhead that was all the way across the river, and you put in another parallel concrete walls, or some sort of walls, some sort of maybe sheet piling concrete, whatever, and you created a channel at one side or the other, or up the center, whichever way design is best, I suppose, in which the river could continue to run around it, And what you would do is you would essentially create a lock that could be atop the low head dams, and you would just fill that up. Say somebody would pull into the lock before the low head. You would fill that, and then of course they could move over to the front of the lock and into the river itself, and they wouldn't have to encounter the low head dam. Now that's one way that they could be used without a side channel. But these are mysteries. They're mysteries because, for one thing, there doesn't seem to be a lot of information about why we have so damn many of them. These are clearly not natural structures. And there are never, just absolutely never, sufficient explanations for why these exist. And there's absolutely insufficient explanations to why these exist in spades. And I'm moving along a little bit more. I'm by the Howell Island Conservation Area. And this one's got a very large one, actually, that they call the Centaur Chute. And it has 2 blockages in it. 2 blockages in it. And the main course of the Missouri River that is not in the Centaur Chute, that's just out here, we have these structures that are somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 feet. One of them, 600 feet long. And you can imagine 500 feet. This one I can see below the water. And I'm not measuring their bend. 650 feet. Look at this one right here. With that large bar or something, whatever that structure is right there, 700 feet out from the shore. And now we get in before the end, or actually depending on which way this is going, but before this it ends out here, we've got these structures again. Parallel, and then diving into the shore. That's 671 feet is the parallel stretch of it. Now, how far out from the banks? Not the shore, the banks. Same, 650 feet. It's amazing. These structures. I mean, you can just see them. Do you see this one? This one is following all the way up the river, just following all the way up the river, just like that. Isn't that something? Perhaps, these structures existed for monitoring traffic on the rivers and other things. And perhaps these rivers were once very straight. The paths, not necessarily they didn't wind, but without jagged shorelines and all. But anyone out there that knows much about rivers, structures in rivers, and all of that, if you do, tell me what you think these might have once been. Because there's way too many of them, all on the major rivers, and I'm just going up the Missouri, and this is just the run of the Missouri. You see them all there? As I pull out, you see all of those there. This is all just within. I'm only a few miles outside of St. Louis, where I stopped at as the crow flies, from the center of St. Louis at the Mississippi River. 183,000 feet. So let's try that in miles. Yeah, 34 miles. Not that far. Not that far. And we've seen so much. Of course, river distance, it's significantly more, but I'm not going to measure that. Just wanted to bring some of that stuff to you guys' attention. And that was really it for this particular video. So, see you next time.